Thank you to Tara Hain, Lila Sachs, and Rabbi Sarah Noyevitz for rolling out the red carpet tonight. This would not have happened without you. I am so grateful. Thank you to Rabbi Nita-Lisa Sperling, SVIVAH's Director of Education, who is not able to be here tonight, but was so the heart and soul behind tonight's gathering. We are so thankful to you, Eliza. We miss you, and we hope that you can feel all the love and Torah in the room tonight. A very, very big thank you to our partners. First, to the Aviv Foundation and the Covenant Foundation for helping us learn with and from each other, and to Holy Blossom Temple, Toronto's first synagogue and home to the fantastic, prestigious, and honorable Rabbi Yael Splansky, who we are so lucky to have here tonight, and to Wonder and Repair, the most beautiful space of Jewish connection and care you could imagine, and you'll understand why when you hear from the stunning Tehila Eisenstadt, who is its founder. And Acharon Chaviv, the best for last, thank you to the SRE Network, Safety, Respect, and Equity. For the past 2 years, we have partnered with SRE to create rooms like this one, rooms that address gender-based violence and sexual harm in a space of Torah that is intended to be compassionate and restorative. Compassionate in bringing community a little bit closer to understanding the experience of victim survivors, and restorative in reminding victim survivors that there is community that cares, that they are not alone, and that we have Torah to learn from them, and because of them, they make our community better. Please, if you have a second, check out SRE's work at srenetwork.org. They are an amazing community resource, and we are so grateful of the work that we've been able to do with them. Thank you so much. Okay, I really want to stop talking so that we can start learning, but selfishly, I just want to tell you where I am sitting right now, aside from Washington, D.C. I asked all of you to share in the chat one word about how you're feeling right now, which I realize is pretty obnoxious of me because I feel like the response is either ein milim, there are no words, or there is so much that we are all holding that I don't even know where to start. And if I were to start, I wouldn't be able to stop. I want to just dedicate tonight's learning in the merit of peace and healing that is so needed in the world. And I'm like hoping that the power of all of us here just makes a very big dent in all of that. In all of my lifetime, and today I feel like I am at least 1,009 years old, I have never felt this Jewish time of year as appropriately as I do right now. This month of Av, this Jewish period of mourning, feels like someone retroactively stuck a label on us because we've been mourning already for 10 months. I took 5 minutes earlier this week to glance through the Tisha B'Av text of Eicha, Lamentations. And truly, it read like the newspaper on October 8th. Each line evoked another image that I don't think I will ever be able to get out of my mind. This is a dark, dark time. And I am just so thankful to know, love, and learn from Dr. Gila Ben-Shimol, who is one of the bravest teachers that I know, because she walks into the darkest places and times in people's lives as an advocate and champion for survivors of sexual harm. I'm going to let Gila explain more about how tonight was designed, but before I hand it over to her, I just need to say one thing. One of the goals tonight is to have the victim survivors who are among us, and you are among us, feel seen and held. And Gila continues to teach me every time that I speak with her what it means and what that looks like. And I know, and I am not making direct eye contact, that there are people in this room tonight whom I have disappointed by not showing up with the care that you needed or wanted from me personally. I'm sorry. Everything that we do at SVIVAH is about working harder to create a Kehila Kedosha, a community that holds us. I know I didn't hold you in the way that you needed, but I am committed to learning to do better, and tonight is definitely part of that learning. But also, tonight is just part of that learning. We have much, much more to learn and do as a community. I am sorry because I know this conversation and learning does not have magic fairy dust. This conversation will not fix evil or heal wounds or right wrongs or even chart a clear course of action. This conversation tonight and learning tonight will do one thing. It'll bring us together into a space of listening and learning with some of the most beautifully compassionate educators I know. We know that some of you have personal stories that would shock and infuriate us. I know that something tonight will be too much or not enough or the wrong thing or leave you feeling unseen. And I am sorry because I need you to really, really believe me. The thought of adding more pain or triggering anyone in any way is enough to terrify us into thinking that we shouldn't do programs like these at all. Because as much and as badly as we want to make everything better, we're not confident enough that this is how. But we know that the Jewish community can do better to validate and honor the experiences of survivors. We do know that so many of us have been deeply, deeply activated by the news that just keeps coming out post October 7th. And we do know that so many of us care so deeply but are at such a loss as to what to do in the face of so much pain. We don't have answers, but we do have Torah. Hard Torah, painful Torah, but Torah that holds us, that teaches us, and Torah that teaches us how to hold each other. So again, I'll ask your forgiveness and your understanding. We will not meet everyone's expectations or needs tonight, but I am confident that we will at least make sure that SVIVAH is a space where we don't look away, where we know this conversation is necessary and important, where every survivor in this room should know that we see you, we believe you, and we stand with you. And we believe that the Jewish community has a responsibility to you and a role to play in your healing that deserves much more attention and care. Tonight will be a very small hug when so much more is needed. Please take some comfort in knowing that at least we know that this is not nearly enough. I want to take a second now to just ask the wonderful Rena Phillips to introduce herself quickly to everyone. Rena is here as a clinician, and in a few minutes, we'll open up a breakout room where Rena will be available to anyone who just needs a break from the teaching tonight for whatever reason. She will be there throughout the program. We want everyone to be gentle with themselves tonight. We all need that. Rena?
Thank you so much, those words. So my name is Rena. I'm a therapist here in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm really happy to be here. This is incredibly important. I just wanted to say a couple of guidelines. This is not the place to speak specifically about people, naming names or any specific incidents, with information about people. This is not a group therapy setting, although for some it may be therapeutic. We, of course, welcome general thoughts, feelings, and I'll be sitting in the break room just as a presence to hold space if anyone needs to process anything that comes up.
Thank you so much, Rena. Please know you can always opt into that break room or privately message tech support to ask for help to be put into that break room, and you can leave and come back to the Zoom room whenever you need. Now I get to introduce one of the most wonderful teachers, Dr. Gila Ben-Shamal. You'll see her formal bio in the chat, but I need you to know that Gila is a most special, special human. I have never met a fiercer advocate for survivors, but Gila does her advocacy in a way that is illustrative of the powerful Torah teacher that she is. Gila will advocate for survivors by kindly but firmly holding the hands of all of us around survivors, showing us, teaching us, and modeling for us the ways that we can truly support one another. Gila is a true visionary. She sees a world that is fueled by empathy and compassion, a world of healing and holding. Her work is so, so holy, and I am just so lucky to learn from her and stand next to her while she teaches alongside all of our incredible teachers tonight. Gila, thank you so much for tonight.
Thank you, Ariella. If I can only live up to everything, the kind things that you just said, it is really my honor to teach with and learn with all of you. And I learn from all of you every single time I am privileged to come in and learn this type of Torah, this type of specific HerTorah. So before I begin, I just want to name the hard particular things we're going to talk about tonight, so that if some of us have experienced those things, we are going into this with full awareness, and we can make decisions about how we need to take care of ourselves. You can turn off your camera. No one's going to know why. You can go to the breakout room. You can leave and come back. Please do what you need. So the two specific kinds of traumatic experience we're going to talk about tonight are mourning. So for those of us who have lost our loved ones recently or in the far past, it doesn't matter how much time passes, there's pain to being a mourner, there is pain to being left behind. And we are also going to talk about sexual violence and survivorship. And so there is pain in being a survivor, there is pain in loving a survivor, and there is pain, as Ariella bravely, I'm making that word up, bravely just showed us in disappointing survivors. And so I imagine that all of us have some experience of loss, because that is a human experience, but that is what we're going to talk about tonight. So please just do what you need to take care of yourself. And the goal of tonight is really to get into the mindset of what Tisha B'Av is. What is the 9th day of Av, which we are going to commemorate next week. Looking at the rituals of mourning specifically that we do during this 3-week period, which I will talk about, and using the mourning rituals that we are supposed to help mourners in, right, to help them and support them, using that as a framework for how to approach sexual violence survivors. And you may think, if you did not see Ariella's wonderful advertisement for tonight, well, what does sexual violence have to do with the 9th of Av? This is the day that we commemorate the destruction of both of the temples. And why are we making this link, right? Does every program that Gila speaks at have to be about sexual violence? No, but there is a real connection. And so we're going to talk about what that connection is. So while we are in this 3-week period, we're going to talk about mourning and lamenting. We're going to highlight the ways in which the special reading on the 9th of Av talks both about the Jewish people's national loss and also evokes the imagery, and Rabbi Yael Splansky is going to teach us how it evokes the imagery of a woman that has been sexually violated. And we're going to ask why. Why is that the way in which the text frames the national loss that the Jewish people experience? We're going to look at that specific kind of trauma and understand maybe survivors are mourning something too, and what might that be? And is there a way that we can learn to show up for survivors from the way in which we as Jewish people show up for our friends and family and colleagues and peers and even acquaintances when they are mourning people that they have lost in their life? And then Tehillah is going to share with us what I really think is a creative gift, a ritual that she created to understand her own experience of sexual harm. And so what I hope we come out learning from tonight's excellent teachers is a better understanding of actions we can take to support survivors of sexual harm in our communities, and a renewed understanding of the links between the 9th of Av and this whole time period, with empathy for sexual assault survivors and other kinds of sexual harm. So that's the framework that I just want to set for tonight. I hope we come away with some more compassion and some more empathy for ourselves and for others. And I hope that we can stretch ourselves. I hope that, as Ariella said in our preparation, we can learn to flex a muscle that we might not even know we have, or a muscle that is a little weak, that the same way we might not want to go to a Shiva house and it's uncomfortable, We don't know what to say when someone discloses that they have been sexually harmed, or when we know that sexual harm has happened in our community. I hope we can leave tonight and say, actually, I'm starting to think that I might have a roadmap. I'm starting to think that there is a way. And as the advertisement for tonight said, this does not feel like an ancient retelling this year, not the story of destruction and mourning, nor the story of sexual harm. Many of us have spent the last, since October 7th, sitting in mourning and sitting in the stories of sexual harm that either continue to be silenced or to be denied or to be celebrated, which I still cannot get over, that the victims of October 7th suffered, and that some of them continue to suffer while being held hostage. And so I just want to name that this is very real and this is very alive. So let's begin with first talking about the 3 weeks, because I don't want to take for granted about this time period and what we may or may not celebrate and what we may or may not know. And so the 3 weeks, which is a time period in which we are in right now, is an annual mourning period that falls out every summer. It begins with the fast and it also ends with the fast. And in between those two fasts, it is a mourning time. It starts on the 17th of Tammuz, and it ends on the 9th of Av. And what happens to that mourning period in between those 3 weeks is that it starts off more mild, and it ends into more intensity. We are now in the 9 days of Av, where there is a lot of intensity in the mourning, and it actually peaks on the 9th day of Av, which is when we commemorate the destruction of both of the temples. And on both of those dates, on the 17th of Tammuz and on the 9th of Av, which bracket the 3-week period, many tragedies have befallen the Jewish people. And so it is a time to mourn not just the destruction of temples, but these national losses that have occurred historically over time. On the 17th of Tammuz, the walls of Jerusalem were breached, which then allowed for the destruction of the temple on the 9th of Av. So there is a continuation. And the 9th of Av, which is next week, next Tuesday, it begins on Monday night and follows into Tuesday, is like the national saddest day of the calendar year for the Jewish people. It is a day that gathers all of our sorrows into this very, very heavy moment. Not only do we remember the destruction of the temples, we remember the expulsion from Spain and many other heartaches. And as Jewish people, the people of the book, there is a particular book that we gather together to read on the 9th of Av. And that book is the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentations, which Rabbi Splansky is going to talk to us a little bit about. We also, as I said before, intensify in our mourning rituals on that day. And we are intensifying our grief. I'm just going to put an article in the chat for anybody that wants to read more about the 3 weeks so that you have an opportunity to learn on your own, even on the 9th day of Av. So that is for anybody that wants to read more about that. So as I said before, there are certain mourning related customs that we do during these 3 weeks. So for example, some people do not listen to music during these 3 weeks. We do not have weddings. We don't have parties. During this time of year, many of us don't eat meat, right? Don't drink wine. We don't do things that would add to our joy. We are trying to decrease our joy. We're not trying to obliterate it. That's actually really important as Jewish people. We're never trying to obliterate our joy, but we are trying to decrease our joy. And where do we get this mourning rituals from? They are actually similar to the mourning rituals that we do, God forbid, when we lose a loved one. And so even in preparation for this, I was thinking about when I lost my mother and when I lost my father and the mourning rituals that I had to engage in during that time. When we lose a loved one, however, we have a playbook. We know that there are certain things we have to do, both as a mourner, but also as a community. What helps a mourner is the fact that the community comes to visit them. They come to take care of them. And what's really interesting, though, is that the mourning of a human being actually is the opposite of the mourning of the temples. So for the mourning of a human being, it starts really, really intense, right? We have the funeral, You have the Shiva, which is the most intense time of mourning. And then it lessens into the 30-day period. And then it gets even a little bit less into the 11 months. And then the 12-month marker, the Yortzeit for Ashkenazim, or a Nachala for the Sephardic people. That's what we call it. And then we have right, every year, you remember your loved one. For the temple, which is a building, right? It's a physical building. Yes, it was a spiritual building, but it was a physical building. It's a little bit more distant from us. We actually do the flip side. We go from less intense mourning, feeling the loss, and building to the more intense, right? And that's a message of how can I connect to this physical building where we do the opposite of how we mourn for human beings. And so I want to go back to the Jewish text that we read on this day, the book of Lamentation. This is the special reading for Tisha B'Av that sets the tone for this tragic and mournful day. It is in the writing section of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, and it really is Lamentations describing the siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. Earlier this year, I was really honored to be invited by Rabbi Yael Splansky to Holy Blossom Temple to be on a panel about justice for survivors of sexual violence on October 7th. And at that panel, she reread some of the verses of this book. And it struck me really strongly because she read it in a way that made it come to life, because that is the year in which many people have been living this year. And it also reminded me of what an author, Sophia Zohar, wrote about re-examining Eicha after her own experience of sexual harm. And I will share the article later, but before I bring on Rabbi Splansky, I just want to quote Sophia Zohar. She says, Eicha has many readings, political, historical, even environmental, but one I don't see discussed much, though equally valid, is the reading through the eyes of a sexual assault survivor. This kind of tragedy is one that survivors know very well, and we carry it in our bodies. By using the text as an entryway to understanding that experience, I believe everyone can learn how to better empathize with survivors, as well as think of how we can all rebuild after our own walls have come down. And I was thinking about Sophia's work while I was listening to Rabbi Splansky then. And so I'm so honored to introduce her now to help us delve deeper into the text of Eicha. So Rabbi Splansky is the senior rabbi of Holy Blossom Temple, Toronto's first synagogue, and she proudly holds the Baskin Garson Senior Rabbinic Chair. Rabbi Splansky, I'm so excited to learn from you.
Shalom, everyone. It's really good to be with you, and this is my first introduction to SVIVAH, and I'm your newest, biggest fan. So thank you to all the leaders who make gatherings like this possible. And thank you, Gila. I learn from you every time. Thank you. So let's jump in. I'm going to set the frame a little bit for just an excerpt from the book of Eicha, from the book of Lamentations. I'm going to read from chapter 1, and I'd like you just to listen to the poetry of it. Without any distraction of the words in front of the screen. And then I'll pull it up so that you can see it, and I'll share the source sheet so you can come back to it. And I have some additional layers of commentary and text. If we have time, we'll get to those too. So the biblical book of Lamentations recalls the year 586 BCE, before the Common Era, when the Jewish people was ripped from our homeland and taken into Babylonian captivity. Traditionally, on Tisha B'Av, the book of Lamentations is chanted with a very special and haunting melody. And maybe if I'm brave, I'll give you just a little introduction to its sounds. And oftentimes, we are sitting either on the floor or on low chairs, or even a chair turned upside down. And that's the choreography for reading from the book of Lamentations. We actually play the part of a mourner. And these rituals are meant to stir in us more than empathy, but also the ability to really identify with our ancestors who suffered and survived. One thing that's worth noting is the first chapter of the book is in an acrostic. So one verse Aleph, one verse Bet, and so on. And that is a biblical mnemonic device to help us remember. So why would such a hard text be made accessible, to be called up by memory, even without a text in front of you, but to have it chanted as a memorable song? I think even in that, there's something instructive, that hard truths need to be remembered and sometimes articulated. The word Eicha does not mean lamentation. Eicha means either alas, it's a word of calling out, and sometimes it's translated as how or why. How can this be? Why is it so? But one thing I want to point out, Gila mentioned the difference between lament and mourning, and maybe we'll come back to that later in our conversation, but a lament is a crying out. It's a schreien Gewalt. It's this open-mouthed, full-throated cry when you're not really expecting an answer. And I think that's the very definition of a lament. It's a crying out without really expecting an answer. It's a questioning word, but not, I think even in that, the relationship between the speaker and whoever is listening is a strained one. So the poetry of Eicha personifies the Jewish people as an individual woman who is at risk. And it's interesting to think about the metaphor. How is a woman's body like the land? How is the land like a woman's body? Beautiful, often but not always fertile, sometimes coveted, sometimes at risk of invasion. So I hope that if these verses are hard to hear and hard to receive, that you might be able to reframe whatever pain you might be feeling as shared pain, because this time it is. On Tisha B'Av, it is intended to be shared pain that we carry together. And it may be a strange kind of comfort in knowing that while everyone's experience is entirely unique, of course, there is also common ground. There is some shared experience across the generations and across the centuries. So maybe I'll just chant the very first verse as best I can, and I imagine there's some with us tonight who have much more skilled and beautiful voices. Eicha yashva vadad ha'ir rabatiam hayta ke'almana rabati vagoyim sarati bamedinot hayta lamas. Alas, lonely sits the people, once lonely sits the city, once so full of people. She was once great among nations, now she has become like a widow. The princess among states has been taken captive. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. There is none to comfort her among all her friends. All her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes. All her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places. Her virgins are defiled. She is utterly unconsolable. Her babies have been taken into captivity by the enemy. Gone from beautiful Zion is everything that was once her glory. All the precious things she once had in the days of old, now Jerusalem recalls. In her days of woe and sorrow, when her people fell by enemy hands with none to help her, when enemies looked on and gloated over her downfall. She has become a mockery. All who once admire her now despise her, for they have seen her disgraced, and she can only sigh and recoil. Uncleanliness clings to her skirts. She can give no thought to her future. She has sunk down low with none to comfort her. See, O God, my misery, how the enemy laughs, how the foe has laid hands on everything dear to her. She has seen her sanctuary invaded by strangers. May it never befall you, all who pass along the road. Look and see. Is there any agony like mine? Hear, all you peoples, and behold my agony. My young women and my children have been taken into captivity. I cried out to my friends, but they accuse me of falsehood. My crying is without end, and I am heartsick. So I'm going to do my best now to pull up a source sheet that I created for us tonight. I know some people are visual learners and like to have the words in front of them. Can you see this? Okay, thank you. Oops. Here we go. So I'll point out just a few things from the Hebrew, from the poetry, that may help us dig a little deeper into this text. Badad. So the city is described, Jerusalem is described as alone or lonely. And it seems that's the dominant feeling when someone has been hurt. And it's something I can say as a rabbi, it's a word I hear all the time since October 7th. So many people are feeling lonely or alone, including the state of Israel, among the nations of the world, Israel is feeling alone. I also want to point out the word ke'almana, like a widow. So how is Jerusalem, the city personified, made like a widow? There's no mention of a spouse who has died. So she isn't mourning someone, but it seems she is mourning something that she has lost. Is it her confidence? Is it her trust? Is it her faith? Is it her joy? Is it her innocence? How is she like a widow? And then there's a very private scene. It's nighttime, and she's crying alone. And maybe she prefers to cry alone. Maybe there is some comfort in being alone with one's thoughts after harm. But then she laments being alone when it says there is none to comfort her, that her friends have betrayed her. So she's not, in the next scene, she's not alone by choice. And somehow it seems that the victim is being blamed. They reject her because she reminds them of something they don't want to believe is possible. I think I'll jump to verse 7. Here we are. All the precious things that she once had. So there is a longing for what was. Jerusalem personified as a woman is wishing that she could go back to the days of old. She's recalling a life that once was, but she knows it's impossible to return. There's no going back. She knows that she is changed. In verse 9, there is a recognition that it's impossible to plan or to dream, to imagine a life ahead. Jerusalem personified is stuck in her present tense, or maybe in her past, where verse 9 says she can give no thought to her future. And then I'd like to call attention to the shift in this chapter, in the voice that we hear, where the speaker turns to God. The speaker turns Godward and says, "See me and see my misery." She is calling Jerusalem, personified as a woman, is calling on God to be her witness and to know the truth of what befell her. And there is this likening of the woman's body to the sanctuary, the innermost, most sacred chambers of the temple in Jerusalem. So it's a holy sanctuary within a holy temple, within a holy city, within a holy land. There are these concentric circles. And that may also sound familiar. And then in verse 12, she says, "I don't wish this upon anyone. May it never befall you, all you who pass along the road." So those who are walking along the road are not noticing. They're just passing through. And Jerusalem calls out to them and says, "Look about and see. Notice me, witness. Do not turn a blind eye." And then in verse 19, I think there's a very important reference here where she says, "I cried out to my friends, but they accused me of falsehood." So in the program that Gila mentioned and that Cheryl Sylvester and I helped to plan together, we gave out "Believe All Women" pins at the end of the night, right? I think this verse 19 is reminding us how important that is. And then finally, verse 22, "My crying is without end, I am heartsick." And that's how the chapter closes. So it becomes like bookends. We loop back to where we began. At the beginning of the chapter, remember, her cheeks are wet with tears and she's crying alone. At the end, she says, "I'm back there again. I'm in this loop of private weeping." I want to share a teaching about the word Eicha, which is spelled Aleph Yud Chaf Hey. And that is that those same four letters in that very order are repointed, repronounced, and set in a very different context. All the way back at the beginning of the Tanakh, in the very first chapter, we find in the very first scene in the Garden of Eden, God calls out to Adam and Eve, Eicha, or specifically to Adam. God calls out to the first human being, Eicha, where are you? Eicha, Eicha. So what's the link? The rabbis notice this linguistic connection. And in that scene, when God calls out, where are you? When Adam is hiding out of fear, hiding, it's implied that there is some shame there as well. God is asking, where are you? But of course, God knows where Adam is. If God knows everything, it's not a game of hide and seek. God knows where Adam can be found. So why does God ask Eicha? So that Adam can have a chance to articulate where he is. And I think this is a good modeling for us. God is modeling for us how to ask a good question of a mourner or a survivor or anyone who has had a hard story to bear. Just the simple question, Eicha, where are you? Where are you right now? Where are you in this moment? And then God goes quiet and waits for the answer. So if we tie this word Eicha from the beginning of the Tanakh to the word Eicha towards the end of the Tanakh, we see that they begin to speak to one another, that there's this conversation that is not a coincidence, because the very last verse of Eicha, the one in a technical way, it's not the last verse, but we repeat it to make it the last verse. It's the melody that you probably know from when we put the Torah back into the Aron HaKodesh, when we serenade the Torah scroll and we put it into a safe place, restored, a place of honor and protection. We sing, I don't know which melody to choose. There's so many melodies. We sing Hashivenu. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva chadesh yamenu kikedem. Return us, take us back, O God, and we will come back, renew our days as kikedem, as at the beginning. Kedem can mean eastward, like the Garden of Eden was east. Kedem can also mean at the beginning, at the start, the way it was at the very beginning. So there is, at the very end of this very mournful, very heavy, very painful text of Lamentations, there is a looping back to the potential to bring not only oneself to a metaphorical Garden of Eden, where everyone is safe and everyone is not alone and everyone is confident and has what they need and they're nourished and they're protected, but also to bring the world back there again. Eicha shows us the shattering of the world, the rupture, the breakage, and then at the end says there is a prayer now that we can be restored, that the world can be made whole again. So I think I'm going to pause there. I do have on the source sheet some rabbinic texts, both old rabbinic texts and a beautiful text from one of the great rabbis of the Warsaw Ghetto. And then I also included there a contemporary poem, which was written by my childhood friend, Rabbi Hannah Yerushalmi. You may have seen her poetry. She's been writing furiously since October 7th. And there's a beautiful one there at the end called Each and Every Woman. And maybe if there's time, I can read it aloud for you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Splansky, for that beautiful Torah. And I'm so happy that we're not done learning with you. We're going to have more conversations soon. I just want to remind everybody before we continue, especially after that heartwarming Torah, that the break room is still available with Rena Phillips and it is open as needed. You are welcome to come in and out if you need a place to breathe for a minute. So please take advantage of that. I want to turn to something that Rabbi Splansky said, which is when we can ask a survivor or someone who has disclosed to us their personal harm, Eicha, where are you? How are you? I want to implore us as a community to ask it of ourselves. When someone is in our community that has suffered the harm, Eicha, where am I? How am I showing up for them? And that article I mentioned before by Sophia Zohar that looks at the text in a similar way to Rabbi Splansky, she also found comfort in that last verse, or in what we chant as the last verse, because it turns the voice of the lone survivor into the voice of the community. And she says, When a sexual assault happens within a community, the whole community suffers, even if just the victim feels the physical burden. However, survivors are often treated egregiously by society. They're forced to deal with their grief in complete silence or face rejection and ridicule. So to validate their experience would be to admit some unpleasant truths about our communities that we would rather ignore. And often a person's pain is seen as disposable compared to the image and the reputation of the community. Dr. Shira Berkowitz wrote about that beautifully today in an email from Sacred Spaces. And so Sophia ends with, however, on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, we see that the grief of an assault survivor is all of our grief. And in our pain, we see that we all bear responsibility when a tragedy like this happens in our community. And so I want us to ask ourselves, Eicha, and I put all that in the chat for you. I want to ask ourselves, Eicha, because Eicha is related to the mourning rituals that we talked about at the start. Not the mourning rituals of the mourner, but the mourning rituals of the community where we are supposed to step in. And before I turn it over to Tehillah Eisenstadt, it made me think about the sentence, right? The end of Megillat Eicha, the end of the book of Lamentation ends with, right? God, we cannot take ourselves out of this. We can't take ourselves out of this mourning time, this destruction. Hashivenu Hashem Elecha, return us to you. You're the only one that can do it. And what do we say when we leave a mourner's home? I just put some tips for comforting mourners in the chat. What do we say when we leave a mourner's home? So if you're Sephardic like me, we say a sentence, Min hashamayim tenuchamu. May you be comforted from the heavens. And if you're Ashkenazi, you say, Hamakom yenachem etchem betoch sha'ar evlei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you among all of the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. We are telling the mourner, you can't do this by yourself. I am here for you, and I am wishing you that God should comfort you. And so that's also Eicha. How are we showing up for them? And to that end, I want to invite the wonderful Tehillah Eisenstadt, who I was privileged to host on a panel about survivor experiences for the SRE network. Tehillah will share the gift that she created for herself. I don't know if that's what she thought of it at the time, but what I think of a gift that she created for herself and for her friends about how they can contribute after someone experiences sexual harm. You can read about her organization, Wonder and Repair, where this project is housed in the chat. So welcome, Tehillah. I'm excited to be with you in conversation.
It's good to see you. It's good to see all of you, and I'm honored to be here and represent folks who cannot speak, represent folks who cannot yet speak. And I am also acknowledging that I represent just my story, but hopefully some pieces of other people's stories. So thank you for having me. Super nervous, very glad to be here.
You are among friends, my friend.
I am.
So Tehillah, we met because we were talking initially about something you created called SVIVAH. So can you tell us a little bit about what SVIVAH is? What does it involve? And how and why you came up with the idea of a survivor's Shiva?
Yeah, I like a good story. It grounds me. So the story is, once upon a time, there was a survivor going through a bunch of crises, and a fellow survivor and wonderful friend said, what can I do? I'll do anything. And I said, I don't know. I just need to go to the beach with a bunch of friends and sit Shiva, and actually I have no idea what that means. And she said, I'll be there. And from that response, Survivor Shiva was born. So I had to figure out what I meant for me, but also with an eye towards there are people in this room, there are people throughout my life who could also use something, and particularly thinking about how the abuse that happened to me happened in multiple Jewish spaces, and the people who have come forward to share their stories with me, by and large, have also been harmed in Jewish spaces. So where are the Jewish spaces? Where are the Jewish rituals to repair or acknowledge or witness that harm was what I was sitting with. There are great organizations. You're a part of so many of them. SVIVAH is one of them. So in the Jewish world, we have SRE, we have Sacred Spaces, Talmud, fill in the chat the ones I'm not naming that try to prevent harm. But in seeking a place for healing and reconnection that was specifically Jewish, I couldn't find a space. Again, please tell me I'm wrong, and I'll just work with those folks. In non-Jewish spaces, I will say it was incredible to get support from CVTC, our Crime Victims Treatment Center. They provide legal advice, they provide therapy for free for survivors, and Sapria that offers retreats for survivors. So there were some resources, but what I was really, I'm super Jewy. My name is Tehila. And some of the ways I know what's happening and can ground my in a moment or in the world is through Jewish language and Jewish ritual, and it wasn't there. But after saying that and starting to create Survivor Shiva, I realized we Jews have a menu of Jewish ritual and prayers that can serve survivors of what I call, and I'm sorry, I can't quote the source from Psychology Today, but a psychologist who termed it big T and little t trauma, folks who survived trauma that endangered their bodies and trauma that endangered their identity.
I love that you thought not only about yourself, but also other survivors, and the idea that it's different kinds of trauma, because trauma, just like loss, is a human experience. And so thinking about survivors, Shiva, survivor can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I'm really grateful for what you put in the world and what you continue to put in the world. Can you talk about how this concept of survivors Shiva met your needs or some of your needs, and how your friends found a way to contribute to meeting those needs?
Yes, but something I want to circle back to when we get to the end, I don't want to forget, is how hard it is for survivors to ask for the thing, know what they need, ask for the things that they need. So yeah, the trick was I didn't think I was really creating it for myself. I was just a guinea pig for other people. That made it comfortable for me. But your question was, how did it meet my needs and witnesses? And I'm grateful to some of my friends who were witnesses at the first Survivor Shiva, who are here tonight. How it met my needs was, oh my gosh, all over the map. One, part of the story of abuse of the abusers, or just how it sits in abused people's bodies, is it's my fault, it's embarrassing, I'm the problem. And as long, I found this for myself, but I've heard this from other survivors, as long as I keep quiet about it because of how embarrassing it is, I'm actually also accepting the blame. And so being able, with people I love and who love me, to feel safe enough, and with a facilitated guide, and a container that was largely based on Shiva, yeah, I could take that shame off of the pasuk from Eicha that says her skirts are dirtied. That's such a great and solid metaphor. I got to put a different skirt on and say, somebody gave me this skirt, it's not mine. For all the metaphors. And we talked about loneliness. It is deeply lonely. I have so many, I'm the luckiest person in the world. I have so many wonderful friends, family, community members. I'm part of survivor groups that are not Jewish in context, and there's still so many places. And again, really a lot of Jewish spaces and moments that I show up, and I just feel like what I'm experiencing right now, if people understood what I went through, they would be doing things differently. So yeah, and what it did for my friends, I don't know, I don't want to speak for them. But what I can say for other witnesses at other Survivor Shiva is they had understood there were contours of the person who survived pain, and there were contours of loss, but they did not, you spoke my language before when you said map, they had no idea how large the map was. They had no idea, the map was just dark. They just knew that there was a map and they didn't know what it looked like. And by being witnessed witnesses to the person who called them, to the survivor, they started understanding, oh, your reaction to this was because this. Your depth of pain is because I'm seeing some of that depth. So it creates more understanding, connection. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm listening to you, and I'm reflecting on Rabbi Splansky before, and I'm sitting here marveling at the blaming of survivors and the disbelief of survivors that is in Eicha. And we are now still in 2024 pushing against it. And like, when does that end? And whose job is it to end it? And you did this beautiful thing. But what we're hoping from tonight is that survivors don't have to be the ones putting out the call, but that through the learning today and through promoting the Eicha to ourselves, where are we? Where are we? How can we show up? That we can offer that roadmap to survivors and say, here are the things we can offer to you. What resonates, right? Can you talk a little bit about what surprised you about your reaction to the survivors Shiva you held, or other people's reaction, and like what was challenging about it? What was helpful?
Okay, so many things. One, the idea for me of Survivor Shiva, which again started as using Jewish mourning rituals to help a survivor be witnessed, but now is actually a menu for survivors to meet with a facilitator and decide what they want witnessed, and choose the menu items that work for them, and then who to invite to that. So my theory was, I'll feel a little bit better and a little less ashamed if I talk about this, and then something will change. Because sometimes in the midst of anyone who's experienced deep depression or anxiety or PTSD, it just feels like I'm stuck. This is where I live now. And I had an inkling that ritual typically does, and so in this case would, just move something, even if it was a I can't find words, but just slightly. And it was astounding. It wasn't exactly as I thought it would be. I'm sure it was not everything that my friends thought it would be or that they feared it would be. But when I closed with, after you bury a loved one, there are 2 rows in Jewish tradition of people who come to help the mourner, and the mourner walks between them. And that was my closing part of my ritual. And then I went for a walk. And I was a different person after walking through the gates of those loved ones and that ritual, which I thought might happen eventually. And I was not healed. There's no healing. Survivor is, for me, the wrong word. It's surviving. It's a gerund. It's always happening, but something changed. So that was a surprise. That was amazing. I also supported a survivor who was very reticent, but really wanted to try something. We put something together. They weren't sure that they would be able to speak, and 2 hours later took a break. And so they surprised themselves, and the container of the ritual that we prepared for them meant that the thing that they were afraid of, somebody interrupting them, somebody questioning them, somebody getting emotional for themselves when they needed the space to be emotional, did not happen. And so they felt fully heard, and the folks who were there were astounded at what they heard and that they were able to be there in that way. It also surprised me that I failed to think it is a rule for Survivor Shiva that a survivor who is a part of the ritual is in a regular therapeutic process. This is not therapy. This is a spiritual practice and maybe pastoral, but I did not require that of witnesses. And I think that is an important thing to think of, particularly for those who are themselves trauma survivors.
Thank you so much. I'm thinking about the heavy lift it is on a survivor to ask for help, and what somebody wrote in the chat, that you were using what we know as Jewish people on comforting mourners, right? To start from, right? To lay the foundation of like, we know how to do this, we just have to maybe reframe it. It made me think of Dr. Judith Herman's work. So I have her book, next to me. It's called Truth and Repair. And she says this about survivors, and it reminded me of what you have created here. And I'm going to put the quote in the chat. There's two quotes I think about, and I think it's part of what you did. So she says, she calls the community the moral community, right? In restoring honor to the survivor, the moral community restores its own honor, which is what you did to for your friends. And she adds, survivor's justice demands that when a person has been harmed, the first duty of the moral community is to support and care for her. When the community embraces the survivor, justice is served. And she didn't come up with it herself. This is what she gathered from survivors when she asked them what they want. It wasn't all this other stuff. It was the community's support. That's what would heal them. So Rabbi Splansky, I'd like to invite you back in conversation with me, and thank you so much, Tehillah, for what you've created and for teaching us. Now that we've considered this time of year and the related practices, we've looked at the text of Eicha through the lens of a sexual violence survivor. We've learned about rituals to support survivors. I want us to start drawing parallels, right, between us as community members, how we can instruct ourselves to show up for survivors. So Rabbi Splansky, let's talk a little bit about the mourning rituals related to what we do as Jewish people, from the intense period of Shiva to other times of the year where we mark loss. Can you talk a little bit about some of those rituals? I know we've been naming them here and there tonight, but if you could talk a little bit about them.
Sure. The metaphors are many. The parallels, really, you can connect the dots from one column to the other, Jewish mourning practices, and survivors finding comfort. There's so many parallels there. So I'll give just a couple of examples. One is, I find mourners are very struck by the power of the simple act of kriya, of rending a garment, or maybe just a little ribbon that's attached to their garment. There's something about that tearing sound, the tearing of the fabric, that really gets right to the heart of a mourner's loss. And I imagine and Tia could say more about this, but I'm sure there's something there for worship too, about what has been torn, what has been mended, how is a fabric woven together and reinforced and made strong again. Just that metaphor alone is a powerful one. Another, very simply, is the meal of consolation. When the mourners come back from the cemetery, probably the last thing they feel like doing is having something to eat. But our tradition says it's a mitzvah, that you need to nourish your body and you need to carry on with living. And so I can only imagine that for survivors to feel it is a sacred duty, it is a sacred obligation to nourish their bodies and to take care of their physical selves, their physical beings. That's really essential, even when they might want to, I don't want to say deny physical selves, but live somewhere else other than in the physical. So that meal of consolation stands for a lot. And then there is the eulogy. It seems so obvious when I say it, but to speak not about the person's ending, but about the fullness of their life. That also is restorative. To say, I'm not only going to remember the painful last minutes or days or weeks or months, but I'm going to recall and honor the fullness of this person's life, both the painful and the miraculous and the wonderful and the proud. And that takes time. So all the storytelling that happens during the Shiva to bring the fullness of a person's life back into focus and view, I think there's something very important there. And then finally, the ritual of getting up from Shiva. And here in Toronto, that's the expression people use. When are you getting up? I didn't know what that meant until I moved to Toronto. I believe it comes from the Yiddish expression, and the idea that the Shiva house is a cocoon that protects us from any concerns or pressures from the world outside, and that's exactly what a mourner deserves, to be just held in all the ways that bring comfort. And then there is a time when we say, okay, let's walk together. I'm going to take you by the hand, and we're going to open the front door, and we're going to step over the threshold, and we're going to take those first steps together. So that, again, a very simple act of getting up from your low place and finding your feet again. That, of course, would be unique for every survivor, when and how and with whom. But it does sit there as a ritual on the map.
That's so fascinating. In the Sephardic culture, we don't have the walking around after, we have getting out. So you cannot get out of Shiva until somebody comes and reads certain verses, and then you're out. We don't walk around, but you cannot take yourself out of Shiva. Someone has to come that's not part of the immediate family and take you out. So it's really interesting that neither way, in either culture, can a person come out or up on their own. They need accompaniment, which is what Tehillah created for survivors in this other realm. So speaking of that piece, can you talk a little bit about community? Why is community such an essential part of the mourner's process?
I'll say two things. One is the fact that mourning rituals happen in community means that the mourner has to confront the new reality, because all these people are coming to witness it. You can't pretend the loss away, but rather the loss is brought into full consciousness. And I find that when mourners, especially when a loss is sudden or unexpected, or without warning, mourners really need to retell the story of how the loss came to be, right down to the very details of what happened, where it happened, when it happened, how it happened. And I find some mourners are actually like on repeat. Every time someone comes to visit them in the Shiva home, they have to retell that story all over again, because they're actually, and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know how to explain how it happens, but it is a way of reprogramming and integrating the new reality into our understanding of our world. So that's the one, is all of our mourning rituals are designed to help the mourners face the reality of their loss. And then the second thing I'll say, which is what we keep looping back to, and that is that the mourners are not alone. And the prayer that we have, Hamakom Yenachem, that God should comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, that I say that all the time, but it never resonated as much as it does now, since October 7th. The idea that every mourner is together with the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, that no one is mourning alone, to be in the company of other mourners, to sit with one another, to validate one another's losses. I think it's a brilliant approach that our tradition takes.
On my screen, I have you and Tehillah next to each other. And as you're speaking, I'm drawing those dots. I'm drawing those parallels between what you are saying and what Tehillah created, hones and shared with us. And Tehillah, I hope you're seeing in the chat how moved people are with what you have done. And it is a real chesed, a real kindness that you shared that with us tonight. So as we were preparing for this session, Ariella and I both read the same article at the same time and shared it with each other, which was about a woman who lost her spouse. And, you know, her friends did not want to just leave her alone. So they took a calendar and they each chose a day. And they were in charge of that day for her, with her, by her, making sure that that's what she wanted. So she was never really alone. And so what's resonating here for me, what I'm thinking about is the discomfort many people have with death. How many times have I heard, like, I don't really want to go to the Shiva house, right? And the discomfort we have with sexual violence, like, I don't really know what to say. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to do anything. And so how do these practices, how do these rituals help us lower that discomfort or give us the instruction manual? You know, Tehillah said before, the roadmap, right? That was what it gave her friends. How does this help us with the discomfort?
Yeah. So I'll go back to the theme of silence, Ein Milim. The tradition says that the mourner speaks first and gets to decide when and if there will be conversation. So those who are coming to comfort them are just to sit close by and be comfortable with the discomfort of the silence and just let it be. I'll say there is something to the fact that Nichum Avelim, to comfort mourners, is a mitzvah, right? Why do we need it to be a mitzvah? Why do we need it to be a commandment that we are duty bound to fulfill? Because if it weren't set on that high plane, then maybe we wouldn't show up. Right? But because it's put into the category of mitzvah, it's not just out of the goodness of your heart or because you're a good person or because they came to your shiva, so now you go to their shiva. It's not a reciprocating kind of thing. It's this is my obligation as a Jew. This is my God-given responsibility, a sacred task. And so even if it's in the middle of a blizzard in Toronto, you just follow your feet, and before you know it, you're walking up those front steps.
So Tehillah shared with us from her perspective about showing up for survivors of sexual harm. I'm curious, from your rabbinic perspective, can you talk with us a little bit about how you think community can show up for survivors in a different way? It is clear from tonight's conversation, and I think everyone in this room was already aware, that suffering sexual violence is a loss. It's, at the basic, it's a loss of bodily autonomy, but it might be a loss of a sense of self, a loss of relationships, a loss of community. So I'm curious on the rabbinic take on community's role here.
Yeah, so it's how Judaism is built, is in first person plural. And I think we could take Tehillah's example of a creative borrowing from over here in Jewish life and recast it over here. So I'm thinking about other holidays, right? We're talking about Tisha B'Av and the text of Eicha, but imagine if we took Pesach, about going from a dark and narrow place to an open space where there is liberation and redemption. On Pesach, we sing Hallel, which is not one note, right? Hallel is not only praise for God, it is also lament, and it is also acknowledging that I'm in a very low place and feeling captive. And so I could imagine kind of Pesach ritual, maybe even a third Seder. Tehillah, I'm not giving you homework, but I know you would do a beautiful job
Well,
of.
actually, I'm trying to find the article my colleague Dico and I wrote during the pandemic Passover about how the whole Seder is a way of making order out of trauma. So I'm trying to find the article.
There you go. So, and Hallel in particular, I think would be a really powerful text to draw from, to take from the Chagim and to place into the mouths of survivors. to consider and reconsider. Mhm.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Splansky. Ariella, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I want to ask you a question and leave you with taking over. So in that article, and I'm going to keep going back to it because I don't stop thinking about it, Sophia writes, I hope we take this Tisha B'Av, this 9th of Av, as an opportunity to rally around our survivors and to see them, a time to ask ourselves how in order to create a world where these things don't keep happening. So Ariella, before I ask you to lead us in imagining what that might look like how we can actually do it, I want to end my portion of this privileged place of leading tonight by saying, everyone says, it's not just the darkness in Tisha B'Av. We have the 15th of Av, which is celebration of love later, and it's always the hope. And yes, and I think we have to get comfortable sitting in the darkness. This year has been too dark. I will share that. But the hope is us. The hope is community. The hope is what we do. So Ariella, I'm going to turn it to you to lead us in building hope. And I will put the article in the chat. I know someone's asking.
It is so hard for me to enter into this space of learnedness. This is not my comfort zone. And I'm listening to you, Gila, ask that question, and I know that there are, I'm sure, dozens of rabbinic sources who talk about how humanity is supposed to show up when we don't see God, when we don't feel God, or doing God's work in the world. And me, in my non-learnedness, is going to go, right, like Mr. Rogers, who said, when things are horrible, you look for the helpers. So there's my Mr. Rogers rabbinic source for the night. But I am deeply feeling that, and I'm feeling that post October 7th, when that was all that my Israeli relatives and friends were saying, that the only thing that kept them going was the amazing overwhelm of kindness and generosity and help that was streaming out from their neighbors and fellow humans in their country. And yes, and it's still dark. I'm reading these giant questions that people are and comments that people are putting in the chat that in Milim, I have no way to answer these questions. There is darkness, period, and I have no solution. And I think that that's what called me and all of us here tonight to say, like, I don't see the light yet. This feels dark and darker. How do we find the light? And I appreciate, Gila, you giving us permission to not, paint a rosy picture and turn the lights on right away, but instead to take the time to appreciate what happens in the dark sometimes, and that is part of a process. I want to say thank you to you, Gila, Rabbi Slansky, and Tehila. All of you offered such important Torah, and I'm so appreciative of all the different facets that you added. The acknowledgement of my deep, deep discomfort around loss and the pain of others and trauma of others, and a lack of understanding of how to show up when it feels like it's something that's impossible to comfort or help. And Tehila, the translation of all of that into familiar spaces and rituals and actions. Like, I cannot thank you enough for that translation. It's like, it feels like such a simple Google Translate of like, yes, I know what that means. I know how to show up. I know how to work through my discomfort on the, porch of a Shiva house and show up anyway. And the invitation and permission and the communal responsibility to lean in and figure out how to show up. I am so appreciative of that. And I'm going to be sitting with it for a while, because I feel like the survivor piece of this, the survivors of sexual harm, feels like almost the darkest place. And I saw in the chat, somebody mentioned how, death and dying is a natural part of life, but sexual harm is not. And so juxtaposing the two feels not completely analogous. And I understand that, but I also understand some of the leeway that Tehillah is offering us by giving us at least something to grab onto. So I wanna share a short story. A few weeks ago, I had the privilege of going to the White House actually with Gila and many other Jewish communal leaders to hear the vice president speak about gender violence as a tool of war. Fun, happy times. And watch a screening of Sheryl Sandberg's documentary, Screams Before Silence. And as we were walking in, we passed by a woman dressed in white who was speaking Hebrew. And I did a double take because it was a face that was very familiar. And it clicked in a second. It was Amit Susana, one of the hostages who had returned in November, and the woman who was the first hostage to come forward with her testimony of sexual violence in captivity. You may have seen her testimony or read the articles about her in all of the major newspapers, or maybe you saw that video of her that I cannot get out of my head with her being carried through a field by 10 terrorists and actually fighting them off. She was so fierce, like so fierce. And then like she was right there in front of me. And I looked at Gila and I just stood there. I was like completely stuck. There was something in me that wanted to just drop everything and run over to her and hug her and cry with her. And I don't know her and she doesn't know me. And we have a language barrier and all of the things. And she was there with her mother and I was just frozen. And luckily I was standing there with Gila and Gila said the right thing, which is go over and say what you need to say. And I did. And I walked over and I interrupted Amit's conversation and managed to get out a whole 3 words before I couldn't speak anymore. I said, Slicha gibora shelanu. And I put my hands on my heart. I said, excuse me, but also Slicha happens to be, I'm sorry. Our hero, our bravest one. And she said, Toda, thank you. And then I had to run away because I needed to burst into tears. Thankfully, Gila was there. Because her pain was too painful for me. And then later, after we watched the screening of the film, I happened to glance over across the room and I saw Amit's mother, Mira, watching her own daughter talk about the abuses that she suffered in captivity with tears just silently rolling down her face. And she must have heard nothing that was on the screen was new, I'm sure, to Amit's mother. But what was clear was that Amit's mother needed to hear other people say those words of comfort to her daughter too, because as a mother, I can't even imagine, like she couldn't help her daughter's loss. She couldn't comfort her own daughter. And Amit's mom, Mira, needed all of our help by saying those whatever words we had of comfort, because she wasn't able to do that heavy lift for her own child. And so with that story in mind, I want to ask us to try a little bit of an experiment. I managed to get out only 3 words, but in a way, what I'm learning and taking from tonight is that that was all she needed from me. I was not her inner circle. It was all her mom needed from me, 3 words. So we're going to put a link in the chat to a Padlet, which is like a Jamboard. You can use the Padlet or write directly into the chat, whatever you choose. And I'm going to invite, if you're comfortable or inspired, to share one line of comfort, that one sentence that, Gila was awesome and shared the 2 different lines that Sephardim versus Ashkenazim use in the house of a mourner. But what is that one line of comfort or one sentence that you would say to Amit Susana, to her mother, to Naama Levi, to her mother, Ayelet Shachar, to any of the survivors of October 7th, or to any of the survivors that you know in your lives, in your communities? What is the one sentence that you wish you could say to them with a hand on your heart? And so if we could just take a minute and start writing the words that we would want them to hear from us. The Padlet link is in the chat, but you can also just type into the chat too if it's easier. These are beautiful. I see you. I'm here with and for you. I understand love. You are not alone in your pain. Hineni. You're not alone because I'm here with you. Boded, you're not alone. We prayed for you. May Hashem give you strength. Thank you for these. Okay. Oy. We love and honor your heart. Okay, keep writing, because we're going to collect these for Tisha B'Av, and we're going to share them anonymously because survivors should hear them and take comfort from them. And because that's our role and responsibility, our mitzvah as community, to comfort each other, to hold each other, because we will all know loss in our lifetimes and we all will need to be held too. Okay, please keep these beautiful things. Please keep them coming. Oy, we will be able to thrive. These are amazing. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to welcome back Rena Phillips to hold us right now, our clinician who's been kindly holding space in our break room just to help us hold ourselves and each other a little bit before we leave each other tonight. But before I hand it over to Rena, in the chat, it's hard to like leave this space or think about leaving this space. I'm really glad Rena is here. Okay. Rena, you are the right person to hold us all tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say it was so nice to meet a couple of you that came into the break room. It's really important to know your limits, to know when things feel a bit too much. And just kind of before I close off, if anyone feels like this was very triggering, reach out to me. I can connect you with therapy resources where you live. Because we all need someone to talk to. So I just wanted to take a minute, acknowledge the heaviness. Some of this may have been very triggering to some of you. So I just wanted to end with a short grounding exercise so that we can come back to a calm place within ourselves for the rest of the evening. So I invite you to turn your attention inward. You can close your eyes or you can keep them open, whatever you feel comfortable with. Taking a deep breath and noticing any thoughts, feelings, or sensations in or around your body. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Feel the natural rhythm of your breath, the rise and fall of your chest, and do this 3 or 4 times. Notice any sensations or discomfort in your body, and see if you can notice the weight of your body against a chair you're sitting on, a couch, a bed, and just feel held by the earth underneath you. And as you exhale, release any tension, any stress, or any negativity from your body. Just imagine it leaving. Negativity can go into the air, the sky. Just imagine it leaving. And then just turn towards yourself and express gratitude and compassion for the courage that you've shown towards yourself by showing up here tonight. So just take a moment to do that. And when that feels complete, slowly come back, bring your awareness back to the room.
Thank you, Rena. Thank you all for being here tonight and for being such a strong, strong source of comfort. May we all continue to find comfort in each other, and when we find ourselves knee deep, neck deep in days of peace and joy soon, soon, soon. And I know that I will be taking this room with me next week when we say that last line of Eicha Hashivenu Eilecha V'Nashuva Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Just hoping for, I don't know anymore. But I will be remembering that the light is in all of you. So I'm bringing you with me, whether you like it or not. Thank you to our amazing, amazing teachers, Hila, Rabbi Splensky, Rena, Tehila. Thank you so, 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 so much. And please, I really recognize that this was a hard night, a hard topic, and hard to wade into. Thank you for doing it. Thank you.